If you want to use fiction to address important social issues, do it in metaphor. And a comic from 1973 gives us a good example of doing just that. The Avengers 113, written by Steve Englehart and drawn by Bob Brown. Two of the Avengers had recently started dating, the Scarlet Witch and the Vision, a mutant and an android. In this issue, their romance becomes public, and most people are happy for them, which is a pleasant surprise for the Scarlet Witch, who was expecting the worst. But it turns out a small percentage of people view the relationship as unnatural, and a group of not even a dozen feel so threatened by the notion of an android falling in love with anyone that they decide they must kill the Vision for the supposed good of humanity. This group is so afraid of androids and robots that they're willing to sacrifice their own lives to end the Vision's life. They build themselves into human bombs, and their plan is to detonate themselves once they get close enough to the Vision. Since this was 1973, the relationship between the Vision and Scarlet Witch was most likely intended to represent interracial marriage. If the story explicitly preached acceptance of interracial relationships, its heart certainly would have been in the right place, but then it would have limited itself to just that one specific topic, and the comic would very much be a product of its time, and likely having changed absolutely no one's mind about the issue either way. But instead, the comic achieves a broader scope. As an android, the Vision doesn't have any racial background whatsoever. And the Scarlet Witch is a mutant, which is Marvel's metaphor for all minorities. These two can represent any couple considered non-traditional at some point in time, whether it's interracial, homosexual, or transgendered, or anything else. Really, these two characters in particular can represent anyone who is different from you in some way, and who might be hated by others who feel threatened by those differences. Whether the differences pertain to race, gender, orientation, ideology, there's no limit to how people can be different. And then look at the hate group depicted in the comic. The group is diverse, since no one is immune to hatred. And people turning themselves into kamikaze bombs is an appropriate visual representation of how you can destroy yourself with your own hatred. As they dehumanize the Vision, they dehumanize themselves. Of course, the attempts on the Vision's life are ultimately unsuccessful, but they are not without consequence. The Scarlet Witch, who was so pleasantly surprised by people's acceptance at the beginning of the comic, becomes embittered by the hateful actions of this small group. Instead of focusing on the majority of people who are so supportive and open-minded, she starts dwelling on the hatred of a few, which starts her on an anti-human path that persists for several issues after this one. Now, the Scarlet Witch was originally a member of Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants in the early X-Men comics. The hatred hurled at her boyfriend sparks the sort of distrust of humanity that Magneto had previously attempted to cultivate in her. She remains an Avenger, but she starts making the occasional bigoted comment against humans. Distrust breeds distrust, and hatred breeds hatred, and the good guys can get caught in this vicious cycle too. Surface elements of the story are a bit dated, and it does preach a bit. It is trying to teach a lesson after all. But it takes the right approach for this type of story, allowing it to remain relevant 45 years later without directly attacking anyone who might be reading the book. Because a relationship between an android and a mutant is not a real thing. So the comic plants the seeds of acceptance and tolerance, while also warning against the corrupting influence of hatred. If it can happen to an Avenger, it can happen to you.